A warm welcome to all, a warm welcome to our audience, our guests, and also a warm welcome to our speakers here today. Welcome to the webinar commissioned by the Embassy of the Netherlands here in France. My name is Anouk Zaat, and I am Business Director of the Netherlands Business Council. Today, we're going to talk about business culture and communication here in France. We have gathered a great panel of speakers. Present here today is Mikhail Pistedki, Head of Section of the Embassy of the Netherlands here in France. We have Maarten de Bruin, President of the Netherlands Business Council. We have Daan van Boxtel of Oryx, and we have Jos van Erp of DewaFlex, and we have Zaat of Air France KLM. So I think it's time to start because we have lots and lots to talk about. But first of all, allow me to introduce you to Maarten de Bruin. And Maarten is President and founding board member of the Netherlands Business Council France. Good morning, Maarten.
Good morning, Anouk. Thank you very much for starting this webinar this morning about a topic which is so extremely important and maybe even one of the most important things in differentiating France from the Netherlands in terms of business culture. Personally, I live already for 20 years in France, and I can guarantee you there are quite a lot of differences that you need to manage, which are related to language, behavior, maybe even long history backgrounds that may exist as well. But so I'm very happy to actually start today's webinar. For the people here on the call, I just wanted to remind you a little bit what the NLBC stands for. So we're actually the Dutch Business Council in France, which essentially has two objectives. So the first one is to represent the Dutch business culture in France, and the second one is a very operational one and a very practical one, is to support Dutch companies doing business in France. We've started about a year ago because the need was there and we need to make sure that the need was fulfilled. 1 year later, actually, we actually are at a good position to say where we have gotten. So not only have we about 65 members today, and these are companies, right, that support us with an objective to double again this year. We also, over the past year, actually did a lot of events. And one of the elements in the events was, of course, that famous matchmaking. And matchmaking is really for Dutch companies to find business in France, to find business partners in France and support. And maybe some interesting statistics here. So about all the matchmaking that we did, so 75% of all the meetings is really about practical commercial questions. So for example, who can represent my business here in France? I'm looking for a France-based sales manager. Who can help me find one? So all these type of questions that seem sometimes a little bit basic, but are really the heart of our activity and to support the Dutch business to do their and realize their activities in France. I also would like, before we move on, actually thank all our members, and in particular our let's call it landmark members that we have, and we have one of them today on the call as well, which is Air France. But we're also working together with Action, ING. Euronext and others actually to support all these activities. I'm very happy to introduce to you Mikhail Pistedki, who is the Head of Economic Affairs of the Dutch Embassy. Yes, there you are, Mikhail. Thank you very much.
Maarten. Hi,
and I think we can give over the word to you. Please go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maarten. Thank you, Anouk. So I'm head of the economic section at the Dutch Embassy in Paris, and I would like to welcome you all. I know that we're around 70 to 80 attendants at this moment. This is the fourth webinar we're organizing together with the Netherlands Business Council. And we're very happy with this kind of active community. because this was something which we missed until a year ago. The Netherlands Embassy, so we have quite a large economic section, 22 people. We specialize in different sectors: agricultural, high-tech, automotive, aerospace, semiconductors, and fields like energy and health. So what we do is mainly procure information about sectors. So information about the sectors in France. We've commissioned a large report on Northern France, for example, and we'll be going to Northern France with a large trade mission with a minister later this year. But apart from that, you also need an active business community who can help each other, who can find the right lawyers, the right accountants, maybe also business partners. The embassy can help in that respect as well with our network. But I really see this as a benefit to work closely together and have an active community. So today, culture and the business culture. What I can say is a little bit about culture, government to government. We had yesterday the Minister for Climate and Energy, Rob Jetten, here in Paris. He met with Clément Beaune and Barbara Pompili, Minister for Europe and the Minister for the Ecological Transition. And what you see actually is that our frame, so between Dutch and French politics, is more and more the same. We talk about the same issues. We talk about sustainability. We talk about the transition to be carbon neutral in 2050. We talk about Europe as a innovative and dynamic continent, having the right skills. We're talking about developing high-tech industries against in Europe. We're talking about reshoring or nearshoring. So I think that's one of the big differences, differences with times before, is that we really talk about the same, within the same frame. That makes the conversation easier. We see that also with companies which we speak to. For example, members of the Netherlands Business Council Action. We had the CEO here last week at the embassy. We spoke to her with Ebusco. It's easier if you have the same frame, but within that frame to actually have an active conversation about values, what drives you. So maybe that's my first advice from our side, is talk about what are your core values when you engage with, for example, a French partner, and for the French, of course, when you're engaging with Dutch partners, so that you understand where somebody is coming from. I think the second thing is take time to understand each other. So invest in, for example, in doing and diving into the culture of the other region, and try to understand also mainly what kind of legal framework there is. Just a tiny example: in the Netherlands, if you are sick as a worker, you inform your employer that you're sick, and you come again when you feel better. Here, actually, you need to go to a doctor to get an arrêt de travail. And it was only recently that I was confronted with that, with somebody in my team who said, well, I'm hesitant to go to the doctor. And if I don't go to the doctor, then I cannot stay away from work. So sometimes there's these tiny differences which are rooted in legal frameworks. Talk about that and try to understand that as well. One of the key things Action said is exactly the combination of two. One, they stay close to their values and to their to what drives Action's growth. What is their key competitive advantage, but at the same time try to act local and have respect for local rules. So I'm very happy. I think this is a start of a conversation. I hope that based on this webinar, we'll have many more conversations also in a maybe more interactive way. And I'm happy, of course, to answer questions later. But let's hear it now from the companies and their direct experiences. Anouk, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mikhail, for your presentation and introduction of the Dutch embassy here in Paris. I would like to remind the audience that if they have any questions whatsoever about this topic to one of our speakers here today, please enter these via the chat, and we will, well, and during the webinar, but also during the Q&A at the end, get you your answer. So thanks again, Mikhail. Then it's time for our first presentation. Oryx is specialized in international recruitment and intercultural trainings. Their goal is to find excellent local sales colleagues to start or to complete a team. So Mikhail was just talking about core values and taking time, but I'm very curious on how actually Daan forms a team. So Daan, very much welcome.
Thank you.
We're very curious. Take it away.
So, all right. Thank you very much, Anouk. Well, there it is, my presentation. So, well, thank you for attending this webinar today. I'm happy that I can share some of my experiences with France in general, but also more with business culture. So, like Anouk already said, and I think she gave a nice introduction already, I work for Oryx. And Oryx is a company that focuses on especially international recruitment. So we recruit salespeople locally for mainly Dutch companies, small, medium-sized companies, which means that if you have a Dutch company and you want to go abroad, in this case to France, we help you get in touch with the right companies to get installed on the market. But what we do is the recruitment of a very good commercial sales colleague on the ground. And what we see now also more and more is that that we also help French companies the other way around. So I have a company in Lyon that I'm actually helping in the Netherlands, finding a business development manager, and a company in Nantes that is looking in Belgium for multiple sales colleagues. So it works two directions in that case. Yeah, Oryx, I talked a little bit about that already, my own background. So I'm 34 years old, and 16 years ago, I went to France after my high school. I wanted to live like a French guy. So I lived in a host family in a very small village at 50 kilometers of Bordeaux, between the vineyards. And that was a very nice experience. I always went to French campsites with my parents in the past, so I think I fell in love a bit with the country there. And I just wanted to learn the language. And most of you, I think, realize that learning French is not that easy, especially in high school. So I just wanted to go out there, live in France, and get used to the culture, the French way of living. I went to a private school there, which was also quite an interesting experience and quite different than I was used to. But after that year, I came back and I was sure I wanted to continue working with France, the French language, French people in general. So I studied French in the Radboud University in Nijmegen, and afterwards I started working first in tourist industry. I worked for Vacances Soleil, for Belle Villa. I saw, I think, every corner of France in my life so far. Now I'm working for Oryx since a couple of years, and my focus is mainly Belgium and France. I also have a background in Belgium, but to be honest, my passion is really France. So I'm happy that I can go there from time to time. And what I would like to share with you today is more about culture in general. So what is culture, but also zooming in more on cultural differences between France and the Netherlands in general. We all make assumptions. We all think we know and we feel where the differences are, but is that really the case? So I want to introduce to you some research that has been done about it to give you some more tangible and also academic in a way proof that there are from the past really some differences. So that is what I want to talk to you today about. And I want to start with this one. Normal is an illusion. So what is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. And I think this summarizes a lot already. I would like to give you a small example of my own experiences here. When I just talked to you about my youth and that I went to campsites with my parents always. And the first thing I remember doing always in France was I ran to the sanitary blocks, to the toilets, to check if the real toilet, the normal toilet, was actually there. I think a lot of people know in France that you have these holes in the grounds. And I was always a bit afraid of them because I just wasn't used to them. But for the French kids that I met on the campsites, they didn't really care, because for them they had more like the habits of using these kind of toilets. So I remember back in the days that was already a sign that what was normal for me was maybe not normal for someone else. And I saw that so in front of my eyes on the campsites during our French summers. So it's good to realize this. And of course, this is everything to do with culture, conscious, but also unconscious. That's quite important to mention. We talk here about the famous iceberg that is also used in a lot of different fields, psychology, for instance. But our culture is determined by the place where you were born, by your education, the way your parents look at the world and raise you, the way you went to school, and all the things that you saw and you did afterwards. This determines your behavior, but it's coming from more deeply, of course. So a lot is not visible on the outside. So your beliefs, your interpretations, what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, it can be very different from one person to another, and it comes from your past and the places you were born and raised. And it's also good to realize that we talk today about the differences between France and the Netherlands, but even within a country, the cultures can differ like massively. Like I said, I've been in Bretagne, I've been in Paris, I've been in the Alsace, in the Provence, and everywhere you have different kind of cultures, rituals. People behave in general a little bit differently. In the Netherlands, we see that as well. Someone from my area, from North Brabant, is completely different in general in how they grew up than someone from Friesland. And I think it starts there already. So it's not only between countries, but also within a country, there are a lot of differences. And I think being aware of this is already the first step into creating like a link, a connection, and bridging so-called differences. So this applies to you, but also to the other. And this is very important to remember. So I just mentioned already that I wanted to dive a little bit more into the differences between French culture and Dutch culture in this case. And I wanted to take as an example the culture map that you might have heard of. I really recommend reading this book from Erin Meyer. She's like a professor at a high school, a university, a business school, also in France. And what she did was really dive into this cultural thing, and she looked into 8 different dimensions that can define the differences in culture. And I wanted to point out a couple of them because the one that I mentioned here are the most clear, and maybe also the ones that are the most different from one country to another. And we talk about, again, the Netherlands and France here. So first of all, we talk about communicating. So what you see is that in general, Dutch people like direct feedback. They communicate quite directly. You should take messages also quite literally, because out of honesty and respect for your professional counterpart, you just like to say how you feel about it and what you think. In France, feedback in general is a bit more in between the lines. It can be still very direct and clear, but it's not that straightforward as we in the Netherlands tend to do. Leading is the same example. That there's a big difference from the past in culture. So in France, you have this hierarchy more. Huh? So there's a big gap between the boss in general in conservative French companies. He makes the decisions. It's quite top down. Whereas in the Netherlands, you have like a manager that's more like a facilitator among other colleagues. So it's more flat, the communication direct. There are no real hierarchical lines. So that's interesting to know. Deciding process, I think I touched upon that already a bit. But also trusting and persuading is different. Like in France, we always say like, yeah, French are more like building a relationship slowly, also more in a personal way, going out for dinner, etc. But studies show that it is basically like that. So in the Netherlands, we are again much more straightforward, and we build trust via work-related activities quite quickly. But it also means that we can end relationships quite easily if the situation asks for it. So this is also quite a difference. So an example that I can give here is my own experience when I used to work at a French campsite back in 2010 in close to Besançon. I had a French boss, and he was quite conservative, and he was really like top down. He was not really open to communicate with his team. He just gave them tasks to do. I had the beneficial thing that I spoke French already, so I was a bit in between the Dutch employees that were there in the animation team as well, and the French management team. So that worked for me. But you saw already there the differences. But I also have to say that the younger generations start to change. You see that that they have more like an open vision. They have more like an international mind. I see a lot of young French people that would love to work for international companies. So you see that we're talking about culture, but also more about conservative companies. All the things that I just mentioned. You see a lot of French companies that start to move and that start to change their behavior because the generation is changing. So people start talking better English as well, is my experience. So this is quite interesting. I see that I need to continue a bit. So I want to tell you this as well. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So understand what the cultural differences are, and then go into that market. France is not waiting for you to come to their country. So if you want to be successful in France, you first need to understand where's your market. How do people work and behave here? So first try to understand, then to be understood. So try to bridge differences, create awareness, and connect instead of adjusting. If you can bridge differences, you understand where you're going to, then I think you can be successful. And just shortly, I have like a minute left, I think. Our tips and tricks, in our experience, it's the best thing is to hire a French colleague in the field, because then the cultural differences, you get them inside your company. So you bridge those differences inside your company, and the challenge is not in the market with your clients. They talk with a French man or woman, and that's already a big change. French companies like to work with French people in general. So make sure that your communication is in French. The intercultural awareness, we talked about it, and understand where you go and try to adjust by keeping your own identity. So bridge differences with your own identity, and be patient. I think Mikhail Pistedki said it also already, but you need to be patient. And I want to conclude my story with this last slide. Diversity is the one thing we all have in common, and celebrate it every day, because if we all are the same, I think the world will be quite a boring place. So celebrate it every day. Thank you very much.
Daan, dankjewel. Thank you so much for your presentation.
I needed to hurry a bit, Anouk, because I saw again I was talking too much. I'm sorry.
I think no, but today we have a great panel of speakers, and I really want to thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure.
I totally agree, and I think we can both now conclude that Mikhail and also you basically you say the same thing. Like Mikhail said first, or you said first seek to understand, and now you say take time to understand. And I think that's really what it is about. Like take time, observe, and then take action.
Sure.
Daan, thank you so much. We will see
you Anouk.
At the Q&A.
Thank you, Anouk.
I have invited Jos van Erp here on stage, so we're going to continue with our next presentation about communication. DewaFlex is a commercial export partner to the French market, and it's all about communication and establishing relationships with the French. So Jos van Erp, advisor to DewaFlex, is here with us on stage. Welcome, Jos.
Thank you very much, Anouk. Thank you. It's my pleasure to share some on-the-ground experiences with all of you. So although I cannot see you, which I would really prefer, it is a pleasure, like I said, and it's a pleasure as well to have followed the previous speakers, because they kind of bring me into a funnel, starting with some political developments, some economic developments. I'm really taking you to the ground experiences. As a representative of DewaFlex, Roubaix and Eindhoven. First of all, a little bit about myself. My age is 58, and I always say I have more past than future, so I'm kind of impatient. But at the other hand, there's a lot of experiences behind me which I can use every day. I'm a geographer, did my study at the university in Nijmegen, but I studied French as well, and I had the opportunity in the 80s to help a startup company to develop business in France. More specific, their business was to sell chicken fertilizer. So this was my first working experiences, but ever since I feel a little bit like a ch'ti. And ch'ti, for those who do not know, are the people who live in the north of France, and they are perceived like a little bit special by the other French people. So for me, the northern part of France is a little bit my second home country. Since 30 years, I'm a guest teacher as well at some universities and universities of applied science in Lille and in Douai and in some other places. So, but I do have a passion for doing business with France and with the French ever since. Now, I represent DewaFlex. I'm not here today to sell their services, but what DewaFlex does in Roubaix as a headquarters and in Eindhoven, the Netherlands, for the Dutch market, is to give hands-on support on how to enter French market, and especially for SMEs, for small and medium-sized countries, because there are all kind of concrete questions you might ask yourself. What can I do? I do not speak French, or I do a little bit, but what can I do to find out if there is any market for me, if there are opportunities, and if so, what can I do to make it happen? Now, but what's more, I like to share some really on-the-ground experiences with you. Back in the 80s, I was asked to go to France and to meet potential customers in the field of agriculture. And I made appointments by telephone, which already was a kind of a success for a 21-year-old student, I thought. And I left home at 5 o'clock in the morning to meet the first customer somewhere in between Lille and, let's say, Douai, really in the field, literally, actually. And I met the first person together with my boss, with my supervisor, and no coffee was offered to us. And I thought, well, this guy should know that we are a little bit tired, that we did 3 hours of driving, even more, but no coffee was offered, which in the Netherlands we do all the time, even if somebody addresses to us with a product we don't need. And we had to listen to long stories of the successes of this company we were in, and this person was really proud about the region he was living in, and he told a lot about that, but I needed coffee, you know, I didn't get it, but I translated it because it was my job to do so. This person did not really express some knowledge about the Netherlands. And yeah, at the end of the meeting, which took about 1 hour or 1 hour and a half, there were no appointments at all, no conclusions, and so on. So I felt kind of disappointed, and so did my supervisor. So we went to the next potential customer, and we experienced the same story. So, well, we already thought this cannot be a future of this company. And what I saw is that even if there is a kind of need for the product we had, because that was later I understood it was really there, it is not expressed quickly. People do not say what you have is having a lot of added value to me, but they didn't say it. And then again, we showed Dutch research reports by the Wageningen University. They should know, but they were not impressed. Not only because it was not in English or French, but it was Dutch, I think. Some slight interest was shown, but you know, perhaps next year, this year is not that good. Well, people in agricultural sector tend to complain quite a lot. And perhaps for my neighbor, it's interesting. And it was really difficult to come to the point. So actually, we went to the northern part of France, which is Nord-Pas-de-Calais, Somme, and Ende. So it's 50% of the Netherlands anyhow. It's a huge area, which nowadays is called Hauts-de-France, with some extra departments added to that as an economic structure. But okay, this was in the 80s. It was really difficult to come to the point. And we spent 3, 4, 5 weeks meeting the same people every time, because we were welcome. That was not the point, but they always restarted to do their own story, you know. And well, we did everything we could, you know. We were a little bit in a, how do you say, hopeless for the future. We spoke French, we did our best and improved that continuously, learning every day about the specific vocabulary of fertilizer. We organized presentations and info sessions. We involved even a French research institute from Bapaume, and that was a very good decision. We listened with a lot of patience, but we did not give up. We did not give up, and like Daan said, you need to take the time to find to be accepted and to develop confidence and trust, I would say. And then suddenly, this first customer in the area between Arras and Cambrai. And Arras, I learned then that you have to pronounce the last S. If you don't, people do not know where you are. In this very small hameau, this hamlet, we were there at about 11:30, and he never gave us any coffee. And then he suddenly said, can I offer you a lunch in Arras, near the abattoir, because the meat is very fresh over there. And we accepted voluntarily, of course. And we were talking about 3 hours about nothing, actually. Again, the region, again, his kids, perhaps a little bit, but hardly about his business. And then when we said goodbye and we shake hands, he said, by the way, send me 8 trucks of fertilizer next week. We were devastated. We didn't know what happened to us. Send me 8 trucks of chicken fertilizer next week. We were so happy that we ended up in a bar drinking some beers, because finally, we had our first customer, and he turned out to be a real good ambassador for our company. So apparently, we had done something well. And to list it a little bit, we showed respect to him. We didn't give up, but we did not push as well. We involved this French expert from Bapaume, which really made the shift. You need a French person, native French, but a French person to be your ambassador and to be together with you. And presenting a high quality product, of course, is a first requirement as well. And apparently our communication and attitude was right. I would say a little humble, not too much, but listening instead of talking, giving more than you take, and then you will get something in return later. About the why of this kind of attitude of communication from the French, I would say France has a very long and rich history. And most of the French are really proud about their country, and they're not to blame for that, which does not mean that they reject the Netherlands, but actually they do not know a lot about it. We are a small country. In France, you can drive 1,000 kilometers from Lille to Nice, and you can still speak French, which is impossible in the Netherlands. If you drive 2 hours without a traffic jam, you're abroad. French is a large country, and they are oriented on the south. Even in Lille, students prefer learning Spanish or Italian instead of Dutch, which is only 10 kilometers away from them. Now, what did we get in return? A launching customer and the hub in the region, which was very important. Confidence, respect for Dutch quality, which was already there. Excellent publicity, access to valuable networks, concrete business, and good ideas. And above all, I would say we had a real friend in our first customer. I still know this person very well after 35 years. So what are my tips and tricks for doing business? Leave Dutch directness behind and be patient. That is like Daan said, be patient, take your time. Show interest in the customer stories and successes. Ask questions about the region, the environment. Be interested by heart, not just because you have to do so, but be interested. It should be a kind of a passion. Don't bluff too much about the Netherlands and Dutch successes, because when you start talking, they're not very receptive to that. Arrive on time, even if the French not always respect that rule, and just like do what you promise. That is respected at the end of the day. Confirm your appointments and write short reports of your visit. I would say short, just with some bullets to make sure that even if you do not make an agreement, it is clear what you have said. Now, to end up, I like to offer you a little opportunity to in a competition, because DewaFlex recently published Affaire met Fransen, business with French. What can you do? Finish this rule and it will be sent to you before the 17th of February, and the jury will decide on who can have a free exemplar of this interesting book, Tips and Tricks on the Ground, just to start to do business tomorrow. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Jos. Many thanks for your presentation. I'm very curious about the competition. I have read the book, and I think it's for everyone here. It contains a lot of tips and tricks.
Great. Thank you.
I actually have received the following question. So it starts with a statement and then there is a question. So the statement is, in the Netherlands, personal contact is not anymore essential for the development of a relation, and a video conference for that is sufficient. How do you think about that? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, the best way to do business is face-to-face meetings. But over the last 2 years, the Netherlands, just like the French, have been involved with this corona changes which are there. And this has been accepted perhaps a little bit quicker in the Netherlands than in France. But I must admit, and I like to admit that although it works better if you already have met before, it's not a big obstacle to to start building up a relationship through Teams or Zoom. So you can do it. I think that the French took a little bit more time to accept it, but it is there. It is there. And it is respected that even after these digital meetings, you meet in person when possible. But you can do a start. You can make a start with that. Yeah. Sure.
Thanks, Jos. So in the meantime, let me invite Steven Zaat here on stage. Steven Zaat is Cfo of Air France KLM. Welcome, Steven.
Dank je, Anouk. Thanks a lot. Good morning, ladies. Do you do the introduction or shall I do the introduction myself?
Oh, no, you can do an introduction. I just had a short question. So basically in that same line is, if personal contact is more important in France, in what way do you think the French did develop their new relations during the COVID?
That's a very good question. I can. My view is a bit that, of course, I think a face-to-face contact is always better because it's more intense, and especially when you have meetings, you at least see what is the reaction. Like today, by the way, we don't see the reaction of all the people who are listening. So I think that is a key element if you have any discussions on content. I've seen that the French, especially here in the Parisian area, they love to work from home. I think especially we have an office at Charles de Gaulle, which makes it quite difficult for them to go every day to that office because it takes you 1 to 1.5 hours back and forth. So together it is close to 2 to 3 hours. So I think it works very well, but I think especially in meetings where you have to take decisions, it is much better face to face. And that's also maybe a bit what we see in the working together between the Dutch and the French. We have, of course, a lot of our discussions are over the video. And that makes it sometimes also a bit more difficult, especially in the old days when everybody was sitting in 2 rooms, where you get actually 2 rooms discussing one item and not sitting at the same table, not looking at each other. And so I think, it's not a very clear answer, but I think if you just discuss normal things like I did with my team every week during the crisis, and we had, of course, a very deep crisis in terms of business and cash, it worked quite well over the video with the teams. And I think the working from home, which was indeed more implemented already in the Netherlands, I think that is here to stay.
I think so. I agree. So thanks, Jos, for your presentation. I leave the stage to you.
Okay. Good morning to everybody. It's for me a pleasure to be here with you as a community who are interested actually in this Franco-Dutch relationship, in which I work actually every day. So it's good to have some, let's say, peers around me and also to share maybe later in the Q&A some experience. I would first like to introduce myself. I'm Steven Zaat, the Cfo of Air France KLM. I live in Paris since 2013, and I work actually in a Franco-Dutch company since the merger between Air France and KLM. So I would say since the start in 2004. So I've just only 16 years experience, which is, I think, not a lot because I still lived much longer, let's say, in the Netherlands. But I've always worked in kind of Air France KLM's role since the merger. So I was responsible for defining the synergies for our maintenance business. I later integrated the joint venture of Air France of KLM and Northwest into a full scope JV with Delta and Air France, and later integrated our audit teams at Air France and KLM. So I've been a lot involved in all kinds of discussions and dealing with French people. And of course, the last 7 years, I'm really in a full, let's say, group role, which is located here in France. I've been here the CFO of the Air France KLM business. I've been the corporate controller of Air France KLM. I then moved in a full French context as to be the CFO of Air France. And since July last year, I'm responsible for the finance of Air France KLM as the CFO. In my view, there has been a lot of wrong impressions about our group. I think there is a little bit in the Dutch press a tendency to show that the French are actually transferring routes and stealing jobs from the Netherlands. If you look just at the facts, it's simply not true at all. Since we have been merged, there has been no rule broken of all the agreements which have been in place between Air France KLM, and Schiphol and the Dutch state. KLM has grown since the merger till 2019, before COVID, with 56%, where Air France only grew with 24%. So this picture of the focus that the French state is transferring routes and jobs to Paris is just false. We have a group of 72,000 people, of which 27,000 people are in our pilot or our cabin crew. So from the remaining 45,000 people, we have 11,000 people who are working together in a very seamless way and really in joint teams, and where you actually don't even see that we have a lot of conflicts in these teams due to the culture. The main discussions are most between the two main airlines. And to be clear, 99% of all those group functions are based in Paris or Amsterdam or elsewhere around the world. So we have only a holding of 100 FTEs, which are fixed positions here in Paris, like for instance, the consolidation. So it's mainly in my department where that is the case. And then even these management teams are shared equally based between Air France and KLM. So then the question is, how did I survive in this Dutch-French context? And in an industry, I think, who is always under pressure. So we are not an easy industry, which is just growing step by step. We grow and then we are always a setback due to any things which happens in the world. It can be COVID, it can be the financial crisis, it can be 9/11. Let's say for me, and I will come back later, it's just simpleness that you try to be yourself and to be very open and listen to their content and try to respect each other. I have worked in 2013 in teams with Dutch and French people. I know they are very different. I have French people who are really more Dutch than myself. And I think at the end of the day, what I've seen is that working in a multicultural context is a strength, but you need to adjust to the situation. So I don't pretend that I know how to best to do business with French people, and I would suggest that you will always follow your own way of working. But I see some elements in the behavior of Dutch people which are very counterproductive in any international relationship. So not only with the French. So I just try to tweak here a bit and would like to help, but just don't take it as really strict rules. So the first rule for me, and I already said it, is you should be extremely open-minded. I think one of the issues is that we have in both countries is that we have what I call the not invented here syndrome. So if somebody tells an idea, by definition, there is a lot of resistance to accept that idea. And I've negotiated a lot with Chinese, for instance, where that is totally not the case. So when you come with an idea, they are very open minded to it. And what we are doing, and I think it's both Dutch and French, we are trying to convince each other why our solution is better. But at the end of the day, most of the time, there is just one argument why we don't want it. So my view is acknowledge the good parts of both discussions and both ideas. Discuss also what is really the red lines and say this is really unacceptable for me. This is, I cannot go into that direction because I have these problems. So be very explicit in that one and try to find solutions. So I think it's much better to spend time to work together, to take a whiteboard and find ideas to come to a common solution, than working on PowerPoints or memos at both sides and trying to convince each other. Because at the end of the day, you will not convince each other. And I think it's also important is try to step also in the other one's shoes. Therefore, I like to lot the remark of Jos, where he said, try to listen more than talk. So I think being open-minded really helps to find a solution, and I think it also ensures that you have a good cooperation. And then I think rule number 2 is that you should always respect each other's context. So Dutch people have the habit that their world and actually that their working is the normal, and as just stated, normal is just an illusion. Be aware that almost all countries in the world, and it's not only France, are much more hierarchical organized than the Netherlands. So that means that you need to take that into account when you work on a process. That means that somebody around the table, for instance, when you talk to somebody who is working in a French context, needs to have the approval from somewhere, and that he cannot easily move directly around the table. So discuss that and build that in the process. Respect also, for instance, that documents, and I've seen that many times, and I think probably you all have that experience. Documents are sent very late in the evening. That has nothing to do with tactics. I've sit in many negotiations with French teams, and to be honest, they never work even on negotiation tactics. They go directly to the content and the final solution. So it's just that they need the approval of their boss, and their boss will change sometimes things in the presentation, even things that you maybe didn't upfront agree on. My view is I would just don't be upset, just focus on the content and the context and try to work on a solution. It doesn't help to say that you received the document too late, etc., where you talk to somebody who could not act differently in his context. The rule number 3 for me is focus on the content, which is always very important for French people, but be very clear on the process, which is very important for Dutch people. So I think in why is process very important for Dutch people? I think in the Dutch sense of way, there is not hierarchy, so you get actually the time to work on your project and to find solutions, but they need a moment that you need to talk to your boss and to have to, let's say, also the agreement of the rest of the organization. So this freedom comes with a clear orientation that the process should be clear. And I think it's a very good way of working. I think it's even an asset of a lot of Dutch people that they are focused on the process. How are we going to decide? For French, they are much more focused on the content, and they love to go even on the first day already in the smallest details, even if you don't have a joint solution yet. And I think that creates always a big clash between the two, as the French really want to quickly agree on the content and discuss all the details, and the Dutch just want to make sure that everything fits in the overall process. I've seen a lot of times that is spoiling at the end the party. And my view is indeed be very clear on the process. So continually address that during the meeting, even if the French don't like that always. But if you don't do that, I think it also structure, I think, on the other side, sometimes where you will go at the end of the day. But be also very open to their content. So don't be directly a naysayer or say that you don't want to discuss the content because we first need to discuss the process. Let it go hand in hand at the same time and be agile to it. Be also very clear where you have problems with. If you just listen and don't react, they interpret it that you agree. And then if you later want to change you have another vision, they will say for sure that you're coming back on decisions which already have been taken. So be very clear on process, on content, and also what has been decided in the meeting, and define the next steps in the meeting at the end. Take time for that. Rule number 4 for me is that you have to work on the relationship, and I would especially say don't be hufterig. I don't know the English word for it, but I think all Dutch colleagues, the Dutch people here understand me. In every project, it is about in cooperation, it's about the content and the process and the relationship. I discussed the content and the process, but I think the relationship is also key. And I think we are both not very good at it. We are not working on it explicitly. And I think if you don't have a good relationship, you don't come further. And especially for French people, it will be extremely difficult for them if the relationship is broken. You will go, I think, I've seen that you actually go nowhere if you reach a point where the relationship has been broken. So, what I think is important is that that we as Dutch be a little bit less hufterig. So because that can break really the relationship. You should not embarrass somebody in front of a lot of people. I think that will harm you also in terms if you want to achieve something. I see sometimes Dutch people laughing when somebody makes a proposal. And even some French are doing a bit sometimes the same, to be honest, but especially on the Dutch side, they can laugh when somebody makes a proposal or gives an argument. And at the end of the day, that all doesn't work. So don't think that if you laugh that he will change and will come closer to your position. So I think work on that relationship and just be very polite, be open-minded, and listen. And another thing, don't argue over the mail, especially not with a lot of people in copy. So you can argue over the mail in a one-to-one, but with a lot of people in copy, you will never ever convince them. I think you should make time to discuss things outside of the meeting with each other, especially when it's clear that there are two leads for instance, in a negotiation. If you just take the time outside to discuss how do we proceed, given the fact that there are different proposals on the table, I think that is much better. And I think what is very important also is try to make fun. You need to, of course, have both parties to make fun, but I think if you make a bit more fun during the meeting, instead of laughing about somebody else, it will really help. And for me, the last rule, sorry, Anouk, the last one is, and it's already been said, I think we have much more in common than we think. In my view, the difference between the French and the Dutch people have been exaggerated, also helped by the press, by the way. In the Dutch lives the myth that there's a hard-working Dutch man or woman and that in the South everybody's lunching for 2 hours and have another work ethics. Where in the actual situation, I see that people in France actually, in my view, are working longer and more intense and are more attached even to their work. It's not obvious that it produces more. I agree with that one. But I think to just typify them as lazy, that is just not the case. Don't forget that Amsterdam is closer to Paris than Marseille. So at the end of the day, they have more the same culture and the same language, but the distance is not so big. But of course, there are differences due to our schooling systems. The root causes coming from our religion, I would say the Protestant versus the Catholic religion, and of course, traditions which we have in both countries. But in my view, there's nothing deep-rooted which would not bring a great cooperation. So the fact that we have people saying that France is a beautiful country, but it's a pity that there are still French people living there, is for me just a stupid one. I think France would not be France without the French people. And if somebody do not immediately react as you expect, know that there are just differences in behaviors. Dutch are loud, French people are more introvert. So if you approach them out of the blue in the street, they don't know how to react immediately. That's not arrogance, that is just another cultural way. So expect not that anybody is exactly the same as you, and cherish the differences. I think, again, there's nothing which can stand away our good cooperation. That's it, Anouk.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I think that's a beautiful conclusion. And I think we can all recognize ourselves in previous presentations. With that, on that note, I would like to continue to the final part of this webinar. We still have 5 minutes left on the clock, so I'm going to invite all speakers back on stage. And Stephen, one of the questions, actually, and you already answered this, and I think Bert de Boer is right. He says everyone tends to focus on the differences, but what is the common ground between our countries and our business cultures? And this is what you already you start to explain. If there's one thing that we should focus on common ground, what would you say? The goal, for example, or
no, I think what is I think the common ground is that I think in a lot of things we have the same interest, and we are let's say, although I think if you follow the French and the Dutch news, it's about totally different local things, but I think our international view is most of the times not so different, except that I think let's say there's another mindset towards the UK and the US than there is in France. But I think if you just look at it from a global perspective, in terms of values, etc., we are much closer than we think. And I think also when I discuss things in my team about geopolitics, I don't see really a real Dutch standpoint and really a French point of view.
Okay, thank you so much. Dan, I have a question for you from Erik Post. Would you say there is a shift towards a better mastering of the English nowadays?
A good question. Well, of course, I can only speak for myself and my experiences in the field. And I deal a lot with different French generations, with French candidates that want to work for international companies. But what I do see is that people from my generation, I'm 34, that are starting to master English better and better, and they also tend to go abroad more. So a lot of candidates that I meet lived in the UK, lived in Australia, lived in the US, just to have this international mindset, the open mind that I think Stephen was also talking about. They want to discover the world and try to break out a bit of their French bubble in a way. I think that is changing, although some people tend to stay with their French actors in the series that they look on Netflix. It is changing, and I see that they speak better and better English. I think also in universities it's there. So English is getting more important. My experience is that there is a change, but still. To start in France, in my opinion, with a French native locally is still the best option. That's what we see in the field. But apart from that, I'm sorry.
No. I think I agree. Yeah. However, Maarten, you have lived in France for several years. Do you agree with Dan? I cannot hear you at the moment. And your mic is on. I'm just going to swap quickly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, there's a technical. No, I would absolutely agree. I see a lot of people more speaking English in French schools. You see it earlier coming in, and yes, it's maybe a little bit of a different level. But I think the key element in this is actually, willingness, right? And I think if you compare, and there was a recent study on e-commerce shopping, French are much more open to shop abroad in Europe than, for example, Germans are, and about 20% points more than those Germans, which is almost equivalent to the Netherlands. So actually you see there is an inherent wish and an inherent openness to other cultures that is maybe really there. And therefore that language element, that language barrier that we may have, is actually maybe not that important anymore, I think, as of today, as it was 20 years ago.
Mikhail, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, I mean, maybe, so our contacts are on government level, central government, but also on local level. We talk a lot to cities. We have a track where we try to help Dutch companies, architects, developers to get projects in and around the Olympic Games. And what I see is exactly that openness to be interested in solutions abroad and to work together. So, for example, here in Paris, they really want to develop cycling infrastructure, and they're really looking and being open to learn from the experience. So I think also use that, invite your French partners or contacts also to the Netherlands to show them around, and also show something from your culture. And yeah.
I totally agree. Thank you so much. At the moment, it's 11 o'clock. It's time to round up. I would like to thank you all. Thank you to our speakers, our panel of speakers here today. Thank you also to our audience, our guests. A recording of this webinar will be published on our website together with the presentations of the companies, and that link has been shared in the chat. So I also see that there are still other questions that we haven't answered yet. So the questions together with the answers will be published on that same page. We will keep you updated about all events of NLBC on our website, also via our newsletter and on LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions about the Netherlands Business Council, or if you want to know more, please send us an email via info@nlbc.fr. So I thank you again and hope to see you soon. Bye.